So the first woman who was charged was in 2007, and she was charged with aggravated sexual assault. Are people familiar with the Jane Doe case? This was the rape case, and was a woman sued Metro Police? Okay, because there's a correlation here. So when this woman was charged in 2007, the police actually released, this is the woman who was charged with aggravated sexual assault, an HIV-positive woman. The Metro Police released a picture, a full headshot of her with her name, her photo, and her charge, what she was being charged with, and it was on all the news dailies and on the news. So, and this is connected to the whole idea of the public's right to know and this notion of the duty to warn. And that duty to warn provision comes out of the Jane Doe case because the police were heavily criticized for not warning women in particular about the balcony rapist, as he was called at the time. So the police have used that case to justify making public the names and the faces of women who are HIV positive, which then has implications for how this woman is treated. So that's one particular case. The first sex worker who was charged with aggravated sexual assault was in 2006. And again, this whole notion of the duty to warn. So again, this was another situation where the police released a photo of this woman with her name and what her charge was. And also, in this particular case, the locations where she worked on the street, which inherently puts her at risk for violence. And the first HIV-related non-disclosure charge involving a mother and mothering was in 2008, and this involved a Hamilton woman who was charged. She had three criminal charges laid against her. The first was criminal negligence, causing bodily harm. The second was failing to provide the necessities of life, and the third was aggravated assault. And this is a very particular, a very troubling case. Well, they're all troubling cases, but this one in particular because it was the first time that mother-to-child transmission around HIV was actually criminalized in this case, particularly because this woman had decided to change her doctors with her second pregnancy. Her first pregnancy, she disclosed to her medical team that she was positive. Her second pregnancy, she did not, and therefore was not on antiretroviral medication, and her baby was born positive. So when that became known, they charged her with those three charges that I mentioned. And they also, the charge in regards to failing to provide the necessities of life was due in part to the fact that they said because she breastfed her child, that was in correlation with that charge. So CAS, in the end, Children's Aid Society, apprehended both of her children, and she lost her kids and had no access. Neither one of the parents were granted access to her children. So specifically, I just wanted to highlight those three cases because I think they're very important in terms of how we think about the criminalization of women and women's bodies, and also to note that HIV criminalization intersects around class lines and race lines, and particularly around sexuality lines. There is a current case right now. This is the RCMP case, which people may have heard about. Yes, no? No? Okay, so there's a case 2010, just a couple months ago, where two women were being held in a holding cell, and about 8 or 9 RCMP officers watched, because when you're in holding cells, you're always videotaped. There's always constant surveillance. So 2 RCMP officers watched these 2 women engaging in sex or sexual activities for about 9 or 10 minutes and didn't intervene. And as per criminal law, any sexual activity in institutions is forbidden. So when this became known, instead of focusing on the police misconduct, they're now alleging that one of these women may have been HIV positive. So the entire scope of the case is being turned away from police misconduct and accountability to the fact that there's this moral panic around the fact that one of these women might be HIV positive, and what could, this is horrible and horrendous, that sort of thing. And that's a case that if people are interested in that case, I can give you information about it. It's a case that just came to light a couple months ago. And in 2008 in Quebec, this is another troubling case, there was a woman who disclosed her HIV status to her partner 3 months into her relationship with him, and then they stayed together for 5 years. There were issues of domestic violence, and they broke up because of the domestic violence, not because of her HIV disclosure or the fact that she was positive. After they broke up and the man got charged, he then went to the police and said that the woman did not disclose her HIV status. The police then charged her with aggravated assault and, she was charged with aggravated assault, and the partner said that he never knew that she had HIV, which is not the case. It was actually proven that he knew. So what we're seeing, all these examples are to give to bring to light the fact that there are implications for women, particularly around moral panics that are heightened and created around HIV, and this idea that positive women are dangerous to society, and positive women need to be curtailed, and their sexuality needs to be curtailed in a very specific way. According to the AIDS Action Now Steering Committee, they released information, a document that said that criminalization produces a false sense of security and reinforces the stereotype that positive women are dangerous and they're in need of surveillance. Specifically, generally, women find it harder to disclose their HIV status due to a number of reasons. So disclosing might mean you may lose your kids to children's aid, which is a very, very big risk for women who are positive. It may mean that you may be exposed to violence or continual violence or heightened violence. There's stigma, discrimination, isolation that many women are afraid of, rightfully so, particularly in the workplace and their communities. And there's also the fear of rejection in personal and intimate relationships. So criminalization does result in many cases, women not getting tested for HIV and not becoming proactive about their health. In terms of the legacy of racism in Canada, we know specifically that racialized communities and women of color fear disproportionate prosecutorial misconduct, because what we have seen is that there have been very specific and more cases of black men who have been charged with HIV non-disclosure, and we're seeing a trend. Because we're seeing that trend, there's also fears around the fact that this may also carry over to racialized communities and women in particular. What does that mean? That means that women are going to retreat back into their communities and not access health care, which is already very gendered, a very gendered process for many women, particularly women who are coming from marginalized and vulnerable communities. Women are often blamed for HIV transmission, and this is part of the historicizing of women's bodies, this dichotomy between good women and bad women, and virgin women and women who are seen as whores. So women who are HIV positive, who are charged with this, often have to then also face the stigma of being seen as a bad woman or a bad mother in society. Mother-to-child transmission is another issue that we are seeing, again, as I mentioned, the case that I mentioned before. And particularly for women who are from lower income families or environments, when breastfeeding may seem like the only viable option for care for your child, it is highly problematic then that should result in a charge of criminalization if you are an HIV-positive woman. And lastly, the negotiation of sex. So this notion that sex is always consensual and can be negotiated is highly problematic for women who may not have the avenue or the way in which they can negotiate condom use, or even whether or not they want to consent to sex. So there is a document that is called 10 Reasons Why Criminalization of Exposure, HIV Exposure for Transmission Harms Women. It's by the Athena Network. You can Google it. It's a very, very good document. I'm not going to go through the 10 reasons just due to time constraints, but by all means I would suggest that people, if you're interested, take a look at the document and just for your further education around some of these salient issues.